myself and my partner shows not only that the negative is stereotyping us, it also shows their ignorance to us as debaters. Firstly, as women, we have faced the same exclusion from society, from policy, and from debate. Next, as a foreigner and first-generation immigrant myself from the country of Angola in Africa, I can argue that by the negative's definition of blackness, in which they admitted to in cross-ex, that I'm excluded through the same exact blackness, yet I feel no exclusion through implementing this plan. Next, our interpretation is that the affirmative should be able to weigh the advantages of the plan against the framework alternative, which was being enacted by the United States federal government. There is a violation. They don't let us weigh the affirmative at all. Hence why you should vote affirmative. Plan focus. We allow for a stable focus for links and comparison of alternatives. Their framework makes confusion and judge intervention inevitable. 2. They have no route. They access a massive amount of frameworks, links, and impacts. They can leverage framework to move the 1AC. We can never predict what we will have to compare to the plan to, even if we get ground, it's bad and unpredictable. The top of education. Their framework is generic and can be run against basically any and all affirmative plans. They argue that we adhere to bad education, but through running a generic rehashable K, they themselves are adhering to this bad education. How can they possibly argue something they themselves use? Next, ontology must come first, especially in the context of the issues of In the issues of modernity, the foundations of all thought, political, philosophical, and technological, are shaped by ontology. Campbell, Shapiro, 96. As Heidegger himself, and especially a revealing figure of the deep and mutual implication of the philosophical and political, never tired of pointing out, the relevance of ontology to all kinds of thinking is fundamental and inescapable. For one cannot say something about that is without already having made assumptions about that as such. Any mode of thought, in short, always already carries an ontology sequestered within it. What this ontology turn does to other regional modes of thought is to challenge the ontology within which they operate. The implications of that review reverberate through the entire mode of thought, demanding a reappraisal as fundamental as the reappraisal ontology has demanded of philosophy. With ontology at issue, the entire foundations or underpinnings of any mode of thought are rendered problematic. Their critique leads to an unfair debate and essentially is abusive. Next, why policy debate is necessary, Spice and Lyle 3. Traditional policy debate is suffering as a result of the increasingly widespread adoption of two particular types of critical arguments, language critiques and performance critiques. Language critiques indicate the assumptions behind the words and phrases that are used to describe impact claims. As such, teams can run them on the affirmative or the negative, but they rarely implicate the desirability of the plan. Instead, most teams that run language critiques ask the judge to vote for them regardless of whether or not the plan is a good idea, as the offending team's rhetorical choices become the focus of the debate. There's rarely a specific alternative associated with this type of argument, other than the critiquing argument, the team calling them for a rejection of the practice that they indict. Presented by a negative team arguing that the way the affirmative presented their case has negative aesthetic value, a concern with which they argue justifies voting negative. Affirmative teams will use performance arguments to prove that the judge should vote affirmative because of the way that the 1AC was presented, offering an ironic justification for the resolution. In any event, affirmative teams that seek to employ a performance-based method of defending the resolution do not afford negative teams the ability to challenge their plan, as a framework usually makes questions about the net desirability of the proposed policy irrelevant to their criteria for evaluating debate. Next, what is policy debate? Spice and Lyle 3. Traditional policy debate, TPD, can be defined as a debate in which the affirmative must present a thoughtful plan and defend it as being desirable relative to the status quo or any other competitive alternative. The plan is the focus of a traditional policy debate, a notion that makes several general strategies available to the negative in attempting to defeat an affirmative team that has proposed an advantageous plan. It is important to note that a traditional policy debate could also be thought of as a plan-focused debate. Language critiques and arguments about performance are rarely able to meet this burden. Next, education, Spice and Lyle 3. A second reason that the TPD model is the best mode of engaging in this activity is the educational benefit that it offers participants. Debate's a game first and foremost. If it isn't, why do we travel to tournaments with the goal of winning as many debates as we can? But debate is also an extremely educational activity. It is this educational dimension of the activity that makes debate stand out as unique when compared to other forms of competition. While it does not seem necessary to explain why education is an important goal of the activity, we should strive for a game that is completely fair and educational. Judge. The negative team barely touched on our terrorism advantage, or at least they attempted to, and didn't get anywhere with it. But aside from that, they completely avoided going on case against any of our advantages. So I would like to extend on. When arguing debate, the negative was attacked the affirmative's case in order to prevent their plan. The proposal to create that states why the status quo needs to be changed from being enacted. They have several options available to them that make this possible. The affirmative, in order to win a case, must win all stock issues. This gives the negative the option and the job to knock out at least one of the stock issues. The negative is supposed to argue the validity of the affirmative's claims, yet they fail to do so. They also never provide any kind of way as to how they would solve any of the harms or advantages that we presented. Next, they attack the impact scenarios we mentioned, hence why the warrants of every and all guards they haven't attacked the impact scenarios we mentioned, hence why the warrants of every and all guards mentioned in the 1AC should be extended across the globe. They lack an argument that the current scenario is better than it has previously been, or is more desirable compared to other scenarios. When the affirmative addresses the inherency of an issue, the negative, as per basic debate rules, work towards proving that certain barriers exist, although this is not a deal. The negative uses a framework K to argue against the passage of our plan. When argument K, debaters challenge the mindset or assumptions behind the opposing team, which they haven't done. And then, since they haven't touched on any of our things, I'd like to extend upon our advantages. I'm sorry, George.
You have 2 left.
I have 2 minutes? You have
Yep.
2 minutes. This is offensive. Scholars have responsibility to be policy relevant. That's listen to. Political science and international relations have produced scholarly work that does bring important policy insights into contemporary political science, but put limited value on policy relevance. The end of September 11 drive home the need to bring policy relevance back into the discipline. This is not to say that scholars should take up the agendas of journalists. Theory can be valued without policy relevance being so undervalued. Dichotomization along the lines of we do theory and they do policy consigns scholars to conversations that are excessively insular and disconnected from empirical realities. Teaching is enhanced when students' interest in real-world issues is engaged in ways. CNN is not enough. There are gains to be made for the scholarly community's standing as perceived by those outside the academic world. It is both for the help of the discipline to fulfill its broader societal responsibilities that greater praxis is to be pursued. Next, to extend on our PTSD advantage. PTSD changes your identity, proven 6. Description that applies to many traumatic encounters and other vivid memories, such events are likely to function as turning points. That is, a specific episode or series of episodes that appears to alter or redirect the ongoing flow of the life course. It provides some explanations on the subsequent choices, acts, and values of the person. It may be perceived as a major casual event, and thus as a highly salient turning point in the person's life. It may cause a person to focus on those aspects of his or her current life condition that can be explained by reference to the trauma and to ignore aspects that defy such casual attributions. Having a traumatic event as central to the person's identity is likely to mean that the trauma is seen as emblematic to the person's self and or symbol for the persistent themes in the person's life story. Next, dehumanization outweighs all other impacts. B. Root 97. The dehumanization of humanity toll is already greater than that of any war, plague, famine, or natural calamity, and its potential danger to the quality of life in the fabric of civilized society is beyond calculation. While it may never be possible to quantify the impacts I stand open for 6.
How are we stereotypical, you said?
Well, by reading blackness against us, you're stereotyping myself and my partner because we present, well, clearly we are white females, and presenting blackness against us is stereotypical and assuming that blackness cannot exclude either of us.
So you asked me a question in class, you said, can white people experience a form of blackness? And I said yes. So how is that exclusive towards you?
Because you said that
Because
blackness
you said
is the
that-
idea that a human over a human, it's a position that contains institutions, how it ultimately, what is it?
Like, do you understand the argument I said?
I
about the
understand it, but you
spectrum?
also read that prior to me asking you that question in cross-sec, so that's kind of an invalid point to bring up.
You said in your speech that, or well, your partner said that our focus on policymaking is racist in your Shaw 4 card. We're proving that we're going against this. We're saying that our actual case, our policymaking efforts are not racist, as my
Okay,
partner
I'm talking
mentioned.
about the stereotyping issue.
Because you mentioned in your 1 and C, you mentioned stereotypical all-boys club, you mentioned stereotypical white male, well-educated, mindset.
How does the all boys club and the
I'm saying it in
white
reference
male
to,
not?
you read this blackness argument against us prior to me asking you those questions in cross-ex, hence making
So
the
you don't think
assumption that
blackness includes you?
not when you read it in the 1 and C, it completely excluded us.
Alright, I don't think you, okay. So you cannot, how is it that, wait, you said that it's our way of framing the debate is bad because you can't challenge it, but aren't you challenging it now with your last speech?
We're challenging it because we're being forced to challenge it, but it's an abusive argument to make to us because it's a generic framework, that you can
That
make
can be
towards
rehashed
anybody.
for years on end for various affirmatives, no matter what the affirmative from, you guys can run this critique against it.
Well, this is the first time we've run this critique, so I mean, like.
We're not saying you specifically, we're saying it's a critique that's
Okay.
rehashed over and over and over again.
So, alright, sure. Are you going to continue to talk about, terrorism and in the environment?
Well, you haven't touched upon it yet.
Well, I'm just asking, cause you don't.
Yes, because that's
Well, we
exactly
already
what, that's
asked for it to
exactly
be
what our
extended across
purpose
the
is.
closing.
Yeah, alright, why is traditional debate good?
I read a card stating that traditional debate is good because it's what provides us with not only new forms of education.
So we should always reuse that same form of education, isn't that the same thing you were just saying about our generic?
No, I'm not saying we should
You
always
argue-
use that same form of education, but I'm saying it's a foolproof form of education that has worked well. One of many forms of education that we could use, not the
So
only
the
one.
original debate where women weren't even allowed inside, that's okay?
I'm not saying that it's okay or not okay. I'm just saying debate as we know it in today's modern times.
Time.
Thank you.
In pro-
I'll take some.